Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with journalist Charlie Warzel. We'll get with Charlie in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in today. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review, and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Charlie Warzel is a journalist who helps audiences to make sense of our current digital moment, analyzing technology and media in a time of intense upheaval and cultural change. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of its newsletter, Galaxy Brain, about technology, media, and big ideas. Previously, he was a writer at large for the New York Times opinion section. Charlie, welcome into the back room.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start off with your latest piece in The Atlantic. It's called The Slop Candidate. Donald Trump embraces a working-class fantasy. And you open the piece writing about Trump's recent stunt at McDonald's, where he pretended to work inside a closed restaurant, handing out fake drive-through orders to fake customers. Talk about the slop, what it is, and its significance in the larger picture of Trump and his candidacy in the AI and digital age.
Sure. Well, the first thing, what it isn't, as a lot of right-wing folks on X and other platforms thought, it's not a reference to the food at McDonald's, which I am not degrading McDonald's here. Everyone has eaten at McDonald's and depended on it for moments in their lives. Anyway, slop basically is a word that's used to describe this output of generative AI tools like image generators, or they generate videos too, but also like voice clips and things like that. Mostly pertains, though, to synthetic, quickly generated images, where people, type in a prompt of anything they want and conjure something up. And that stuff has flooded a lot of social platforms, the whole of the internet, but a lot of social platforms recently, probably most notably Facebook and X. And a lot of these things are just, very uncanny styles of images, right? You'll see a person that looks mostly real, but they have 3 rows of teeth. It's very subtle, or 8 fingers, things like that. And there's sort of like a cartoonish, hue to the output. But anyway, I've written about this before because I find that this type of imagery is really popular with the MAGA movement. Mm-hmm. They are using these types of image generators to illustrate a lot of their tweets. A lot of, they'll say Kamala Harris is a communist. Donald Trump and Elon Musk have posted these synthetic photos, and it'll, be this sort of uncanny looking Kamala Harris in a huge auditorium, and there's a hammer and sickle there, and everyone's wearing red, and they'll say, this is what you're going, what you'll be voting for if you vote for Harris in November. And this stuff is so popular with them, I think, because, as I've written, the MAGA movement for so long, especially online, has been kind of building up a durable alternative reality, a world in which, dangerous migrants are scratching at everyone's doors, right, and taking over cities, and, they're busing people in to vote, and your school is indoctrinating your kids. All these things that that Fox News and other places are saying, is happening right before our eyes. And these generative AI tools give them a way to illustrate that. Mm-hmm. Like it is a fiction that that dangerous migrants have invaded every city and are turning it upside down, right? But they can go on. X has its own generative AI tool, but they can go on OpenAI, Midjourney, all these different places, and they can spin up their own images to depict this and append it to a tweet or, a post, and it can go, viral. And the idea is that it's painting a very particular fantasy. It's allowing you to illustrate the world as you see it or you want it to be. And so when Donald Trump went to McDonald's and did his he dropped off his E. coli. That's right. Yes. Very bad publicity for him in that sense. When he went, the images that first came out, the sort of the commonality that I was hearing, friends, family, people who are politically engaged and not, were saying, this looks like it's AI. I know it's real, but it looks like it's AI generated. It looks like someone put that into a program. And I thought about that for a while and why it felt like that, right? And I think it's because what it clarified for me is that Donald Trump is kind of the AI slop without the AI, right? If we're defining it as this like hastily produced sort of create your own world and live in it, designed to give an image of something not as it actually is in reality, that's really what he's doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is a Trump rally if not a whole bunch of, random lorem ipsum that's coming out of the large language model that is Donald Trump's head, right? It's just stream of consciousness stuff to fill space, to get attention, to, piss certain people off, whatever it is. And, what's a Donald Trump tweet or Truth Social post, if not a whole bunch of, sort of random words to warp the world, into the way that he sees it. So that's kind of what I was trying to get at there is, these things, those images looked and read a certain way to us because they really were a fantasy, right? He didn't work a real shift at McDonald's. The McDonald's wasn't open. He didn't, take orders at the drive-thru. He just handed people random bags of quarter pounders or whatever. And so I felt like I'm always just trying to, my job at The Atlantic really is to think about, the internet and to think about media and politics and culture and the ways in which, the two are constantly warping each other. And this felt like a pretty good way of, these tools have helped me understand a little bit, a little small piece of what Donald Trump is doing all the time.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And then the piece you wrote prior to that is called "I'm Running Out of Ways to Explain How Bad This Is. What's happening in America today is something darker than a misinformation crisis." Now, you open that piece by saying, quote, "The truth is, it's getting harder to describe the extent to which a meaningful percentage of Americans have disassociated from reality." That's a pretty chilling assessment.
Yeah. It's funny. It's always the biggest struggle for me is writing the first paragraph of any piece, right? And with that piece, the exercise that I went through was to try to speak as plainly as possible about what I was feeling or what I am feeling in these weeks leading up to the election in the information environment. And I think the headline of the piece is just very bluntly just exactly how I felt. Sometimes I think as journalists we try to, spin up something that makes it sound, loftier or bigger or cooler or, more grabby. And this was quite literally just my thoughts. I'm running out of ways to talk about this. I have been writing about the information environment around politics for a decade at least. And it's getting harder to describe that. And I think the genesis of the piece was looking at the swell of fake information, of, harassment against meteorologists, of misinformation surrounding the two hurricanes, Helene and Milton, and looking at that and trying to grapple with the extent to which people aren't just being duped online. I think a big part of our understanding of misinformation, right, is this idea that there are shadowy figures or influencers or bad people out there who are trying to spin a particular reality, and they throw out a lie or a false claim or share a fake image, and that there's all these people walking around with not great media literacy or, less of an understanding of the stakes of the politics, and that they see it and then they're immediately duped, right? And they fall prey to this conspiracy theory. They, it's sort of like, it's like a trance or a spell or something, this amazing bit of persuasion. And the piece gets at this theory from this researcher at the University of Washington named Michael Caulfield, and speaks to this idea that misinformation as it's usually used is actually not a persuasion tactic. it is actually kind of an inoculation tactic. It is a way to actually keep you inside your ideological belief system. It's to keep you from absorbing information that might pull you out of it. So if you are someone who has a lot riding ideologically on the idea that there's really no such thing as climate change, or if it is there, it's really not that bad. And therefore, I don't have to worry about a candidate who's going to get rid of the EPA or increase fossil fuel emissions or whatever, right? If you can keep yourself from having to, recognize the extent of that, you can keep doing what living the life that you normally live with the same beliefs. And when this hurricane comes through, and we start seeing that, these once in a thousand year rainfall events are happening biweekly in the fall in Florida, and you see the destruction and you see sort of the intensity, it's so much easier to actually say, well, the government's just engineering them to make them stronger because they have, weather weapons. And of course they want to do that. It's an election year. And the Democrats, want people to believe in the hoax of climate change. There you go. And I think that is a really meaningful and important way to think about what we're seeing when we see this stuff online. That it is not necessarily a bunch of people who are being persuaded by this, but they are using it to inoculate themselves from the truth, essentially, because the truth is so ideologically and emotionally painful to grapple with. There's a lot of good social science research out there that shows that coming to terms with the idea that you've been holding false beliefs, or the people around you, the people you respect, are lying to you, or that you've been seeing the world not as it is psychologically painful. It's the same as, as a breakup. It's the same as, like real sort of almost, real life psychological traumas. And so I think that's something that we need to understand, because we kind of have to know what we're dealing with, right? And I think it does nobody a service when we walk around. It's sort of insulting to the intelligence of a lot of fellow Americans to say, they're just morons. They'll believe anything. And it's, well, maybe it's not that. Maybe it's they have a real reason to believe this, because to not believe it would be to have to, have this sort of psychological breakup with themselves.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying. And I've thought about this a lot, because we have transcended typical partisan politics, Democrats versus Republicans arguing about taxes and regulation and abortion and guns and so forth. But how is it that we've gotten to this place where upwards of 70 million people believe that Donald Trump is a good, honest man who is simply the victim of never-ending witch hunts and conspiracies, and that only he is the one that's telling the truth, and that everyone from Democrats, Republicans, former cabinet members of his, former aides, the Department of Justice, the FBI, judges, prosecutors, everyone is lying about everything except him. That's a whole different ballgame. How do you explain that? Will we ever explain that? What's at the root of it?
I don't know if it'll ever be. We may find ways to explain it. I don't know if they'll ever be satisfying. But one way that I have tried to sort this moment for a long time, and especially when I'm trying to speak to people who don't spend all day, on the internet, or, consuming this weapons grade style of information warfare, is I find it helpful to sort people less by even the partisanship, and more through the lens of high trust individuals and low trust individuals. To me, that helps really kind of, tell a story of maybe how we got here. I have a few people in my personal life who I have seen, really smart, intelligent people who I've seen kind of, radicalized by the far right information sphere, et cetera. And the thing that all of those people have in common, back from, some of these people I've known my whole life, back from when we were kids, whatever, is this idea of really low trust in people, in institutions, in everything. This kind of, there's not a really different way to put it, but there's like a dark skepticism, of the world and of people. There's always somebody out to get you. That teacher gave you a bad grade, yeah, because she doesn't like this about me, and there's always this idea of people are out to get you, and there's a reason not to trust, and there's only a reason to trust the people who are closest to you. And I think that's a way to look at how some of these, again, talking about like an alternate reality being built, brick by brick over the last 15 years or whatever. It's maybe even been longer than that. But those things really appeal to you if you have this really low trust in other people, in other systems, in other, whatever, right? If you feel like most people are probably trying to pull one over on you, it's very easy to start looking at the media, for example, as a group of people who you don't know, who aren't of your community, who aren't someone that you could necessarily trust, who may be just different than you and hold different belief systems. Instead of thinking of those people as higher trust individuals do, I've always considered myself a higher trust individual. I like to think that a lot of the people who go out, dedicate their lives to something, are doing it not necessarily, unless they give you reason for that they're not doing it necessarily to run a big con or a scam. When I looked at, the New York Times, for example, or something like that, I looked at it even when I was younger as a group of people who were practicing their craft, who wanted to go out in the world and tell stories as truthfully as they could and bring them back, right? Not that they were all political propagandists trying to dupe me. But I know those types of people. And for them, it's really appealing to sort the world this way and to see this and to start thinking about this. You are much more susceptible to believe these types of conspiracy theories because they fit into that model, right? Here's a bunch of liberally indoctrinated folks who come from elite backgrounds who have chosen a job that allows them to keep the status quo, and they will lie, cheat, whatever, to do that. And I think that this is like a really long-winded answer and probably not, I don't know if it's expected, but I think it's like the initial sorting building block of how do you get here, right? And I think if you are someone like that who is kind of low trust, you also tend to be very susceptible to grievance, to the idea of grievance, right? Again, this idea that people are kind of out to get you. And, when things don't go right in your life, or when there are outcomes all around you that are upsetting to you, this sense of grievance is very palpable. And people manipulate that. There's a huge ecosystem that has been built up, whether it's Fox News, whether it's all of the, the influencers, the politicians. There are financial incentives, there are attention incentives, there are, fame incentives to build up this world of grievance. I was looking at a tweet recently, and I think it was from Stephen Miller, but I'm not quite sure. But it was something about the article my boss Jeffrey Goldberg wrote about the Trump Hitler generals that has been going viral recently, and they said this is obviously a hoax, just like Russia was a hoax, just like COVID was a hoax, just like this. And actually, it was very helpful to go through and see all the things, and you realize the power of the repetition here, right? Just every time you see something telling people it's not true, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears, don't believe the people who are risking their livelihood, their credibility to tell you these stories, the whistleblowers, the 5-star generals, the whatever, right? Don't believe it, don't believe it, don't believe it. And you start over time to build up, again, I think of it as like building something from a foundation brick by brick. And you get these reflexive sort of habits based off of it, right? It just sort of becomes anything that this group of people says now, because I have no trust in it, no trust in the institutions they represent. I'm going to reflexively believe that it's not real. And that's kind of how I think you get to where we are.
Yeah, well,
There's so many different
it's like the principles of
but
cultism. I mean, what you're describing is cult-like mentality, where the leader indoctrinates people to cut themselves off from not just family and friends, but reality. And only I'm the one that can lead you to the promised land and protect you, et cetera, et cetera. And your theory about mistrust is, I think, spot on. I'll throw a little racism on top of that, but
oh, sure, there's a lot happening.
Yeah, Trump comes along and says, "You're right. You're right. Don't trust anybody. Only trust me." And I know because they're coming after me. Like it's exactly what we're seeing play out. Except where I kind of get confused is, like, if these MAGA people, if they got a call from the school principal and said your son did something horrible in school and it was witnessed by everybody, and the kid comes home and he goes, "Mom, they're all lying. The principal's lying. The superintendent who was brought in, he's lying. The teachers are lying. All my fellow students are lying. They're all lying." He'd probably get a smack in the face and be sent to his room. Right? They're like, they're all lying. Everybody's lying. Get in your room. But somehow when it comes to Trump, they're like, okay, everybody's lying except him.
Well, I think there's a couple parts to that I would say. The one is that it's not just him, right? There is now this really durable ecosystem
Sure, of
people that's like a scaffolding to support that, right? And one that, like, it's so well developed at this point that it's not just, sort of early on in the Trump era, right? 2015, coming down the golden escalator or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There was a kind of a Trump as assignment editor, right? He would just say the thing and, launch a million different pieces and defenses and rebuttals and whatever. And now that ecosystem, the MAGA ecosystem, is so built up that he'll get a lot of ideas from them, right? Like there's a right. Kind of a channel.
I'm just retweeting what I saw.
Exactly. And so, but back to your point of, the kid and all of that in school. It really, I think, depends and goes back to this idea of inoculating yourself from uncomfortable truths. If the idea was that the kid, was in trouble in school because he said something that was, very clear. Maybe even like a better example is, if the kid was sent home because his parents wouldn't vaccinate him or something like that, right? Like that. And everyone in the, said, it's dangerous for you to be here, or it's against the rules. You've broken the rules. We school system won't let you come in or whatever. You can see, using that as an example, how the parent would be like, yeah, everyone is lying, because there's such an ideological necessity to protect this that it is actually easier to say everyone is lying, and then to go and seek out the people who tell you, yeah, they are lying, you're correct, and just to build that up than it is to, so I can see it actually happening, right? I think it's just about, what do you need to protect, right? And I just want to be very clear, this happens on the left, in the center, that, like, we are, as humans, very protective of the ideologies we build, because it's not just, your politics isn't just your politics. Your politics can end up being your family, your friends, your community, the people you surround yourself with. So I think, what is so troubling now about where we've gotten to is the fact that, I think about this all the time when I see, like, a "Let's Go Brandon" shirt, or, something like that. Like, when people are wearing their politics out in the world in that way, especially like confrontational politics, like, "Oh yeah, you don't like Trump? Be like,
fuck your feelings.
Tell it to my face." Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
When you see that, or the confrontational bumper stickers, or people going down the road with, like, 8-foot long Trump flags, coming out of the back of the pickup truck on the highway. When I think about that, I think about, like, man, that ideology has become such a load-bearing part of their identity and probably their community. Like, I think, again, it's so easy to look at what happens at a Trump rally if you're not a Trump supporter, and say, "Oh, look at all these these brainwashed people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
look at this. But another way to look at it is like a tailgate at a football game, right? And everyone coming together because they love the Buffalo Bills or whatever. Like
But
those
but here, wait, I got to
communities.
push back on that a little. But the key distinction is the people at the tailgate party outside the Jets game aren't mocking disabled people, aren't calling people shitheads and calling
Absolutely.
for violence, and so it is
Yeah,
different, you know.
it's no, it's absolutely different. I've not tried to claim that it is harmless by any stretch at all. All I'm trying to do by drawing a slight comparison there is saying there is a community that is built around it, and
Sure.
there's
Mhm.
something more than just the politics, and that is why getting people out of that cycle is so difficult,
Sure.
right?
Well,
Because
again,
it's
it's like
basically it's not
that's the cult part is the
exactly.
deprogramming is, and to clarify what I was saying before about the kid in school. I agree with you, and that there's nuance and context that could
Hmm.
mitigate a lot of circumstances. But I'm referring to like if the kid was seen and heard calling a little girl the C word, and
Hmm.
then punched her in the face, and then goes home and says to mom and dad, they're all wrong. Even though they're saying they all saw it, they're all wrong. I still believe that there's some ability in parents, usually, to go,
Oh, yeah.
you are so full of shit. Now you're getting punished not only for that, but for lying to us. Get in your room. And so
Hmm.
that's what we're getting from Trump. We see the
Hmm.
Hitlerism, we see the unhinged insanity that comes from him. Nothing he does, nothing he says and does gets the equivalent of those parents to go, wait a second, they all can't be lying. The 5-star generals, they're lying too. Like, that's
Hmm.
what makes me want to slam my head into the walls because it's like they've lost their critical thinking, their ability to reason with reality, which is the point of your whole piece in a sense. It's like there is an alternate reality now. And his
Well,
magic, his special powers, is that he has convinced tens of millions of people that whatever they're saying about me is actually what they're doing. Projection.
hmm.
When he talks, it's either projection or confession. But he's convinced these people that everyone on the planet, everyone, for some reason, whatever, has been able to band together in this ginormous global conspiracy. I mean, if you even just think about that, like, how would that even happen? How would everybody get together to conspire against him, right? From the highest levels of
Yeah.
government down to the lowest courts and everyone in between. But yet that's happened. That's the part that I wonder if we're ever going to get to
Hmm.
really understand that, other than the simplification that it's a cult. He's Jim Jones. He's Charlie Manson. Somehow he's gotten them into this cult, and it's going to take serious programming to get them out.
Yeah, I think a lot about there's a great book um by Eli Saslow, I believe. I can't remember the exact title, but it's about Derek Black, whose father and his family were prominent white nationalists, like, Stormfront style, true, famous bigots.
Mm-hmm.
And he was sort of bred to be the next person to kind of come along and the heir to the racist throne, right? And he goes off to college, meets a woman, meets some people, and the story chronicles basically the de-radicalization process. Like,
Mm.
this guy was going in his car and calling into his family's show. Like, in college, he would go in his car and just go on like long, rants about blacks and Jews and things like that, right? So I mean, truly like a true believer type person, and had this whole community again based around, their obsession over hate. Um, and it describes his de-radicalization process. And I think about this all the time because it's basically these three people who have this almost, like Mother Teresa like patience and ability to sit there and listen to him say terrible things and ask, well, why do you think, like this long, years long process, these three people for one person. Granted, this person, had a lot
Mm-hmm.
that they were up against, but it is that process of de-radicalization, of deprogramming, etc. That is such a painstaking process. Anytime you look at that, it takes so much
Mm-hmm.
to get people to pull people out of that.
And I've always found that to be both it's a really wonderful book, but it's also bracing when you think about the man hours required to do that to a movement, right? Is it's kind of staggering.
Well, one of the new things that we see with Trump, which you write about, is when Republicans are caught in lies, they downplay it with the quote, "it doesn't matter" deflection. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So this was another reason why I wrote that. I'm running out of ways to tell you how bad it is. Scenario. Something that, again, having kind of stared into the abyss of this for over a decade, something that I feel has changed slightly, and I think is really meaningful and concerning, is this notion of when people get caught, what it is, how it is that they respond. And there used to be this, a lot of people would basically try to debate the merits of the truth, right? Well, that's not how I see it. That's, actually, if you look this way, and these convoluted, theories of why they're right and you're wrong, when you're just pointing, you're calling balls and strikes. And they're like, and then other times people would just kind of ignore you, right? It's too shameful to have to admit or grapple with this, so they'll ignore you. But what we saw, especially during Helene and the devastation in Asheville, was all these people, some of them normal folks, some of them politicians, MAGA politicians, were sharing, again, generative AI images of, a little girl on a life raft in Asheville holding a puppy and crying, and they're saying, look, FEMA's abandoned these people, et cetera. These images are very clearly fake. There's plenty of images of devastation in Asheville, if you want them, that you can share, but they don't as easily depict, the precise fiction that they're interested in saying, which is that FEMA is ignoring everyone, and the Harris administration is, look what they've done, right? And so people were sharing this, and when they were getting called out for it, saying, "Oh, that's an AI image, that's not real, you should probably delete that," say, "No, it feels true. It represents something that is happening out in the world, and therefore I should be sharing it because I am raising awareness to the reality that I believe is out there." And that is
bonkers,
right? That is in the piece I cite, but like back in 2005, Stephen Colbert did his like famous segment on truthiness, right? And it's this idea of like the truth and the feeling in your gut that is truer than true, that represents something that to be true, even if there's no proof of it. And that's what we're seeing here. And the sort of the shamelessness of it, the feeling of, oh, I don't even care. Like, why would you even, why would you even try to counter this? This is clearly what it is. Represents a break that to me is, it's pretty notable, right?
Well, we experienced that notable during the Trump years with Kellyanne Conway and her comment about alternative facts. Like that became government policy to do exactly what you're talking about, where there's people are either in one bucket or the other in this country today, and that's in the reality bucket or the other bucket. And we always had those people. They always existed. When I was a kid, they would walk around the streets, screaming to themselves or whatever. But now it seems like it's half the country does not believe in reality.
Well, it definitely, they're a loud contingent, I'd say, is one thing. I don't think it's half the country, but it's a meaningful percentage, right? It's a meaningful electoral percentage, which is what is most troubling. But as if to illustrate the point of the piece, so I wrote it, right? And this is relatively new, even for me, someone who, draws the ire online of a lot of these people a lot of times. I wrote the piece, and somebody tweeted it, and their tweet went viral because they were worried about they try to use it to prove a point that I don't put in the piece, which is that, free speech is maybe a failed experiment or something like that. That's not what I argue at all. The words free speech are never mentioned in the piece, right? Government regulation of free speech, never mentioned in the piece. That didn't stop Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist, and Elon Musk from tweeting the piece and saying this calls for a government intervention on free speech, right? There's just a complete, instead of engaging with the idea of the piece, they made up an argument, right? And then to take it a step further, once that piece kind of really went viral in the MAGA and far-right spheres, a bunch of people created fake screenshots of the article. And one of the screenshot that went really viral was horrible Photoshop. So it didn't even look real. And it was mine, the sub headline of the piece, my name. And then the thing said, the headline was something about, and excuse my use of these terms, but it was anyone who uses the words gay or retard should be sent to a camp. Kind of a ridiculous, stupid thing, right? I cannot tell you how many emails. My inbox was flooded with people, all caps, screaming at me. My Twitter was basically unusable. People saying, I can't believe that this Atlantic writer wants to put people in camps. I can't believe it. I can't, you think Trump's bad. They talk about family separation. This writer wants people to go into camps for saying certain words. People truly falling for and believing this. But to me, what was more bracing about the whole thing was that instead of even remotely engaging with my piece, instead of saying, this guy, he's saying that we live in an alternate reality. It's them who live in the alternate reality. That's the response I was expecting, right? Mm-hmm. But I didn't even get that. It was nobody wanted to engage even remotely with the substance of the piece. What was much easier was to either create a fake argument that my piece didn't have, or create a new piece to engage with, a alternate article, completely different, that they were going to use to kind of slander the credibility of, my byline or the Atlantic or whatever. And again, this represents, it's not different, but it represents a degree of severity further. And it's amazing.
Well, how many of the clips of Jordan Klepper going out to MAGA rallies do we have to see where he'll be like, what don't you like about Kamala Harris and the Democrats? Oh, it's all woke. And then he'll be like, okay, what is woke? I don't really know. Well, so it's a bad thing, but you don't know what it is. Well, I hear it's bad. It's like woke, DEI, all these things which have become these incredibly hot button issues that people are voting for, issues that people are voting for over their own economic and social and health interests. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know. Mm-hmm. Same thing, read the dude's article and then comment on it, right? But that's where we are today. It's like they are angry as fuck about shit. They have no idea what it even is. That's crazy.
And it's just anger in that sense. We were talking a little bit about, the appeal earlier of Trumpism to certain people who may be low trust, et cetera. And something I've been thinking about a bit in the past couple weeks. I've covered Elon Musk for a long time, since before he had any sort of political valence, in the world, and even before he was, tweeting like Charlie Kirk. And I've been thinking a little bit about his presence. He's almost like the de facto vice presidential candidate, right? In some ways, I think this election I think he's almost the central figure of this election, more so than Trump, because there's something novel to Elon Musk for a lot of people, as opposed to, Trump is kind of, where he stands. He's a bit, despite how, the threat he poses. We sort of know what we're getting with him, and I was trying to think about the appeal of Musk and why he is so similar Donald Trump in so many ways. His ability to attract attention, his ability to attract fans, his ability to, potentially draw people out to vote, and why he's become a central figure in this. And I think a big part of it is that in the same way that Donald Trump was emblematic of this kind of, fuck you to big portions of society,
Mm-hmm.
I think Elon Musk's really has a similar appeal. There was my colleague, McKay Coppins, we were both at BuzzFeed at the time. He wrote a piece in 2016, I believe, that was about like Trump's kind of like thuggish mafioso appeal, right? And then also paired with, living in the golden penthouse and this kind of gaudy, brash nature of his.
He's Scarface.
His
He's
appeal.
Pacino in Scarface.
And there's this idea of, if you're someone who, doesn't have that kind of money, doesn't have access to that type of lifestyle, that's the kind of rich guy that you want to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Musk serves a sort of different side of that coin, right? Musk doesn't have the sort of like aesthetic part to him, but his ability, which he's done throughout his career, of just looking at the law and looking at social, mores and looking at, norms and traditions and just throwing the middle finger to them and saying, no, I've got the money. I'm going to do whatever I want. Oh,
Mhm.
it's actually illegal under Pennsylvania state law to give out $1 million, every day to a different person to get them to
Mhm.
vote. I don't care.
Sue me.
Send your strongly worded letter. Go
Mhm.
ahead. See what I'm going to do with it. And that is actually what's aspirational, right?
Yeah.
It's this idea of, again, people, low trust people with a heavy sense of grievance say, man, if I had a lot of money, I would just tell everyone to go fuck themselves,
Well,
right?
Musk is the U.S. Treasury of fuck you money,
Yeah, such a good way to put it.
right? I mean, that's
such
what
a
it
good
is.
way to put it. Yeah, yeah, and it's this sort of idea of, oh man, if I had all these people on Twitter are annoying me with their woke BS, if I had $44 billion, I would buy Twitter, right? He is sort of like the id for that type of personality.
Yeah.
It's aspirational. That's the dream.
You end your piece with this chilling conclusion. Americans are divided not just by political beliefs, but by whether they believe in a shared reality or desire one at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what feels so different to me over the course of, let's just say, since he came down the escalator, right?
Mhm.
Is this idea of, I think we've always struggled with, there's different people, Alex Jones has been around for a while, right? There's a lot of people out there who want to, ensconce themselves in something different, or who would like to believe some conspiracy theories. There's there's always been a strain of that, especially in American life. The paranoid mind or whatever, the paranoid politics. And I think now what is different is that it's a true desire to want to live in a different place. It's not this idea that, oh, maybe something's afoot, maybe there's something we should chase down, maybe we're not getting the full truth. It's fully, I would like to live in a different version of America, and a different version of reality than the one that I'm presenting. And
You might be.
yeah.
You might be in a few months
there's-
living in a very different version of America.
There's one line that's been going around that I think is very helpful too in illustrating some of this when it comes to like the election fraud and stuff. And it's this idea that everything is a conspiracy theory if you don't know how anything works.
Right.
And I really
great.
love that, because it speaks a lot to what's going on now. Like, you're already seeing all these different reports. My former colleague at the Times, Stuart Thompson, wrote about I believe it was in Georgia, just truly someone hit the wrong button on an election machine, right? And was like, oh, I think I may have done something. They didn't submit their ballot. They just, I think I may have clicked the wrong thing. So they called somebody over. And of course, somebody just, at the thing who is a, MAGA supporter type person said, oh, look, the voting machine changed their vote. Yeah, like, here's some proof. And then went and spread this rumor and blah, blah, blah. Not true, even in the slightest. But it speaks again to this idea, right, of if you don't know anything about the election system, if you don't know how votes are counted, how they're tabulated, how the different ballots work, how they cycle the candidates through in different orders so that, the Republicans never always first or are never always last, all this stuff. If you know nothing, yeah, everything's a conspiracy theory then, right? Because you don't understand.
Right.
And I think that speaks a lot to, it goes so far beyond the election voting stuff. It speaks to a lot of the appeal too, right? It makes the world more legible to people.
Yeah.
To say there's this. Like the tough part about being a human in the world is that there's just a lot of shit out there that's scary, that you don't know, that don't have easy answers, and somebody like an Alex Jones or a Donald Trump, who can put a very black and white frame on the world and say, this is why things aren't going well for you. These are the people who are to blame. There's no nuance or gray area here. Go about your lives. That's such an easy organizing principle for people that it allows them to not have to understand how the world works.
Yeah. Well, we have an election in 11 days. Hopefully JFK Jr. will be reelected and everything will be fine. And God help us all. Charlie, this was a great chat. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry for I'm always the downer, but
it's hard not to be.
That's my role.
It's hard not to be. I mean, I think we're all Debbie Downers right now.
I'll just say, I think there's plenty of reason to be Debbie Downer. I also think one thing that though is just that gets missed we tend to look at every next election through the prism of the last one. And it's obviously easy to do that. Donald Trump is on the ballot again. We know what's going to happen if he loses and what he will say and do. But I just think one thing that we don't actually kind of as a media, as a, political culture acknowledge enough is that he's not the president of the United States. Like, it's not 2020. Like, there will have to be, transfers of power, but he might not be involved in that. He can do and say, obviously, whatever he's going to do and say. But in terms of who is in the White House at this exact moment, it's not Donald Trump as it was in 2020. And I think that that's a really big thing that a lot of people who are rightfully very concerned. I think it's one thing that isn't acknowledged in the way that it should be. And it's the thing that's keeping me from, falling fully into the abyss.
Well, I think that's a really great point, and that isn't talked about too much. And you're right. He may end up being the epitome of fucked around and found out if sometime in December or January he does shit and he's not in power. He's not in control. Doesn't run the Justice Department. And he may find out that it's going to be very, very different this time if he loses and tries to pull some shit like he did last time. But, we'll see.
No one has the crystal ball, but I would advise people just to keep that in mind.
Right. There's a new sheriff in town, is basically what you're saying. For now. So, all right, Charlie, thanks again. Come back soon.
All right. Appreciate it.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.